On Saturday, November 25, 1944, Woolworths on New Cross Road was full. It was just after midday. Mothers were buying stockings. Children were looking at toys. Christmas was a month away, and London was tired, but still standing. The Blitz had come and gone. The buzz bombs had screamed overhead all summer. People knew the sound of danger. This time, there was no sound. At 12:26 p.m., a German V-2 rocket struck without warning. The building did not shake first. There was no siren, no engine, no whistle from the sky, and 168 people would not walk out. By late 1944, London believed it had survived the worst of the war. The Blitz had battered the city for months in 1940 and 1941. Whole neighborhoods had burned. Families had slept in underground stations. Fire crews had fought block by block, but London endured. By 1944, that chapter felt distant, like a scar that had finally closed. Then came the V-1. The flying bomb arrived in June 1944. Londoners called it the buzz bomb because of the harsh engine note that filled the sky. You could hear it coming. That was the strange comfort. If the engine stopped, you had a few seconds. Sometimes that was enough to run. Sometimes it was not. But there was a warning. Fighter pilots chased them. Anti-aircraft guns adapted. Barrage balloons filled the skyline. London learned to read the sound. The city adjusted again. By autumn, the V-1 threat had faded. Allied forces had overrun many launch sites in France. The mood shifted. There was still war on the continent, but the daily terror above London had eased. Shops reopened. Streets filled again. People began to imagine peace. What most Londoners did not fully understand was that Germany had introduced a new weapon. It was not a drone. It had no pilot. It had no wings in the conventional sense. It rose straight into the sky on a column of fire, arced into the edge of space, and fell back at supersonic speed. It was the V-2 rocket, the world's first operational ballistic missile. The first V-2 struck London on September 8, 1944 in Chiswick. At first, the British government did not announce what had happened. Reports described gas explosions or isolated incidents. Officials feared that acknowledging a new weapon would help Germany refine its aim. But impacts continued. The rockets were launched from mobile platforms in the German-occupied Netherlands, often near The Hague. They carried nearly a metric ton of high explosives. Each one followed a ballistic arc high above interception range. There was no effective interception system. Londoners did not see the rockets rise. They did not see them fall. They only saw what remained afterward. Even so, by November 1944, the city had regained a rhythm. Shops were busy again. Public transport ran on schedule. Children went back to school. The sense of total siege had lifted. New Cross, in South London, was not a wealthy district. It was working class. Rows of brick terraces lined the streets. Small businesses served the neighborhood. Woolworths sat along New Cross Road, a familiar store with wide windows and crowded counters. It sold small luxuries that mattered during wartime: sweets, household goods, stockings, toys. It was a place of routine. Saturday was always busy. On November 25, 1944, just before noon, New Cross Road was full. Buses moved through traffic. Shoppers filled the pavement. Inside Woolworths, customers stood shoulder to shoulder. It was warm. It was loud. It was ordinary. Somewhere over the North Sea, a V-2 had already completed most of its flight. It had climbed more than 50 miles into the upper atmosphere. It had fallen back toward London at several times the speed of sound. Gravity was doing the rest. At 12:26 p.m., the rocket reached New Cross. The weapon that struck Woolworths did not come from a bomber. No aircraft crossed the channel that day. No formation appeared on radar. The destruction began hours earlier on a concealed launch site in the German-occupied Netherlands. The rocket was the V-2 rocket, short for Vergeltungswaffe 2 or Vengeance Weapon 2. It was the first long-range guided ballistic missile ever used in war. Its origins went back to the 1930s to a research program at Peenemünde on Germany's Baltic coast. There, a team of engineers led by Wernher von Braun developed liquid-fueled rockets powerful enough to leave the lower atmosphere. The project combined advanced engineering with forced labor and wartime urgency. By 1944, the weapon was operational. The V-2 stood about 46 feet tall. At launch, it weighed more than 12 tons. It burned a mixture of liquid oxygen and alcohol, producing a column of flame that could lift it straight into the sky. Unlike the V-1 flying bomb, which used a pulse jet engine and traveled horizontally like a crewed aircraft, the V-2 climbed vertically before tipping over into a ballistic arc. Once launched, it followed a preset trajectory. There was no pilot, there was no remote control after liftoff. Its gyroscopic guidance system adjusted its flight during the powered phase. When the engine cut off, the rocket continued on momentum alone. At the peak of its flight, the V-2 could reach altitudes of more than 50 miles. That meant it briefly entered the upper edge of space before descending toward its target. Gravity did the rest. The final phase was what made it terrifying. As the rocket fell, it accelerated. By the time it approached London, it was traveling several times the speed of sound, roughly 3,000 miles per hour or more. No fighter aircraft could intercept it. No anti-aircraft gun could track it effectively. Radar could detect it in theory, but there was no system capable of stopping it. With the V-1, the danger was audible. Londoners learned to listen for the harsh buzzing engine overhead. If the engine stopped, that meant the bomb was about to fall. Those few seconds sometimes meant the difference between life and death. When a V-2 struck, the explosion came first. The sonic boom, the sound of displaced air catching up, followed moments later. Survivors often described a strange sequence, a violent blast, then a rolling thunder that seemed out of order. It was not out of order. Physics had simply outrun human instinct. The warhead carried nearly 1 metric ton of high explosive, usually amytal, but the explosive charge was only part of the destructive force. The rocket itself weighed several tons even after burning most of its fuel. When it hit at supersonic speed, it delivered immense kinetic energy before detonation. Unlike many conventional bombs that exploded on contact or slightly above ground, a V-2 often penetrated the surface before exploding. That meant the blast could erupt upward from beneath foundations, lifting structures from below rather than pushing them sideways. The first V-2 struck London on September 8, 1944 in Chiswick. At the time, British authorities did not immediately announce what had happened. Public statements referred to isolated explosions. The government feared that confirming the weapon's arrival might help Germany refine its targeting. But impacts continued through the autumn. Rockets were launched from mobile sites around The Hague and other parts of the Netherlands. The launch crews could set up, fire, and relocate quickly. By the time Allied aircraft identified a site, it was often empty. For Germany, the V-2 represented advanced technology in the final months of a losing war. It consumed vast resources. It did not change the strategic balance, but it offered something else: unpredictability. Its speed and altitude placed it beyond the reach of contemporary air defenses. By late November 1944, Londoners knew that something new was happening. They may not have understood the details of altitude, velocity, or guidance systems, but they understood one thing clearly. They understood that the nature of the threat had changed. New Cross was not a headline district. It did not hold government buildings or military headquarters. It was a working-class part of South London, shaped by rows of brick terraces, small shops, and steady bus routes that carried people into and out of the city. New Cross Road cut through the area like a spine. Tram lines had once run along it. Buses now passed in regular intervals. On Saturdays, the pavements filled early. People collected wages, ran errands, and bought what they could while supplies lasted. Woolworths stood along that road, a familiar presence. The storefront had wide display windows facing the street. Inside, the retail floor opened into broad aisles and long counters. Shelves held household goods, sweets, stationery, small gifts, stockings, and toys. It was not a luxury store. It was dependable. That mattered in wartime. By November 1944, London was cautious but active again. The heavy bombing of the Blitz years was behind it. The V-1 flying bombs had faded in frequency. Life had not returned to normal, but it had resumed. Saturday, November 25th was busy. Christmas was 4 weeks away. Even in wartime, people marked the season. Parents bought small presents when they could find them. Children saved ration coupons and pocket money for simple things. A trip to Woolworths was part of that routine. Just before noon, the shop was crowded. Customers stood close together along the counters. Staff moved between registers and stock rooms. Outside, buses slowed as they approached shops along New Cross Road. Pedestrians crossed between vehicles. It was cold, but not severe. The kind of late autumn day where breath showed faintly in the air. During the Blitz, air raid sirens had been part of daily life. Their wail could empty streets in minutes. Even during the V-1 campaign, the engine noise overhead often triggered instinctive movement toward shelter. Several miles above the English Channel, the V-2 had already completed its powered flight. It had risen on a column of flame from a launch site in the German-occupied Netherlands. Its engine had cut off minutes earlier. Now it was descending along a ballistic path toward London. No one in New Cross could see it. The rocket was small against the sky and falling at tremendous speed. It did not glide, it did not circle, it simply dropped. Inside Woolworths, nothing hinted at danger. Children examined toys near the seasonal displays. Mothers compared prices on stockings. Shoppers queued at the counters. The sound inside was ordinary. Conversation, movement, the ring of a till drawer closing. Traffic moved steadily outside. Drivers had no reason to look up. There were no contrails or aircraft formations. No anti-aircraft guns were firing. At approximately 12:26 p.m., the descending missile reached the final seconds of its arc. For the people in Woolworths, the last moment of normal life was indistinguishable from the one before it. A customer reaching for a package, a clerk turning to answer a question, a child standing near a counter. Above them, the rocket crossed the final distance to street level in a fraction of a second. On New Cross Road, buses continued their routes. Pedestrians stepped from curb to pavement. A shop door opened. Then the weapon that had climbed into the upper atmosphere began its final impact sequence. And the ordinary rhythm of a Saturday afternoon ended in an instant. At 12:26 p.m., the V-2 reached New Cross. It did not glide in, it did not tumble. It struck almost vertically, descending at several times the speed of sound. The rocket's engine had cut off minutes earlier. What reached London was a falling projectile driven by gravity and momentum. The first physical contact lasted only an instant. The rocket hit near the Woolworths store along New Cross Road and drove into the ground before detonation. Unlike many conventional bombs that explode on contact or slightly above the surface, a V-2 often penetrated soil or pavement first. That penetration mattered. A fraction of a second later, the warhead detonated. Nearly 1 metric ton of high explosive erupted at or just below street level. The explosion did not simply push outward, it forced upward as well. A blast wave traveled through soil, foundation, and structural supports in a violent surge. For those inside Woolworths, there was no warning interval. The pressure wave reached the building faster than human reflex. The foundation failed first. Brick and masonry fractured under sudden upward force. Steel supports buckled. The shop floor, crowded moments earlier, lost the ground beneath it. Instead of a slow collapse, the building folded inward. Large retail spaces of that era relied on brick exterior walls and internal steel columns to hold open floors. They were designed to support weight from above, not to absorb explosive force from below. When the upward shock displaced the base, the load-bearing structure lost stability. The roof and upper portions of the building dropped. Walls split and tilted. Glass storefront windows shattered outward. Dust and pulverized brick filled the air in a thick cloud. The blast carved a crater in the roadway and beneath the structure. Typical V-2 impact craters in London measured roughly 20 to 30 feet across and up to 10 feet deep. At New Cross, the explosion tore open the ground and undermined the immediate area around the store. Adjacent buildings suffered severe damage. Shop fronts collapsed. Terraced houses nearby lost walls and roofs. Brick fragments and structural debris scattered across the street. The detonation followed impact almost instantly. Inside Woolworths, the destruction was immediate and total. There was no time for people to move towards doors or stairwells. Counters, shelving, and ceiling materials fell together. Brick fragments became secondary projectiles. Dust reduced visibility to almost nothing. On New Cross Road, buses were rocked by the shockwave. Windows shattered along the street. Pedestrians were thrown to the pavement. For several seconds, there was only debris and silence, broken by the settling crash of collapsing masonry. The destruction did not extend uniformly across miles of London. This was not a firestorm. It was a violent, localized rupture. Buildings nearest the point of impact were crushed or severely damaged. Structures further away suffered broken windows and structural cracks. The Woolworths building did not burn for hours. It collapsed. Within moments, the shop that had been full of customers became a mound of brick, twisted metal, and shattered timber. The floor plan disappeared beneath rubble. The counters and displays that had filled the space were buried. Dust drifted across the street. Power lines sagged. Smoke rose from the torn earth. People who had been inside were trapped beneath masonry and steel. Some were killed instantly by the blast and collapse. Others were caught under debris, injured and disoriented. The confirmed death toll would reach 168 people. More than 120 others were injured. Many of those killed had come to the shop for ordinary reasons, to buy sweets, stockings, small Christmas items. A significant number were children. Within the seconds immediately after impact, no one knew the numbers. There was only shock. The street that had been busy seconds earlier now held a crater, flattened storefronts, and a collapsed department store. Survivors stumbled from damaged buildings. Some were bleeding, some were covered in dust so thick it masked recognition. The V2 had struck, and the building had failed from beneath. The threat no longer needed wings. It did not need sound. It only needed gravity. For several seconds after the blast, there was a strange pause. Dust hung in the air. Bricks shifted and settled. Smoke drifted from the crater in the road. People who had been walking along New Cross Road stood in shock, trying to understand what had just happened. Then the noise began. Shouting, calls for help, the sound of masonry being pulled by hand. Those who were able moved first. Survivors from neighboring shops and houses rushed towards the collapsed Woolworths. They did not know it was a V2. They did not know what had caused it. They only saw that a building had folded into itself. The structure was no longer a store. It was a heap of brick, broken timber, shattered glass, and twisted steel columns. The retail floor had collapsed downward and inward. Counters and shelving were buried under debris. The front facade had partially disintegrated, spilling rubble into the street. Local residents began digging with bare hands. Civil defense teams and fire brigades were alerted within minutes. Ambulances made their way through streets choked with debris and stunned pedestrians. Police began cordoning off the immediate area to prevent further injury from unstable walls. Rescue work in a masonry collapse is slow. Brick structures fall in heavy, compact layers. Each removed piece risks shifting weight elsewhere. Firefighters and rescue crews had faced similar scenes during the Blitz, but this collapse was concentrated and dense. The blast had undermined the foundation, so the debris pile sat unevenly over a crater. Voices were heard from beneath the rubble. Rescuers listened between movements of debris. They called out. Survivors trapped in voids beneath collapsed floors tried to answer. Time mattered. Dust inhalation, crush injuries, and internal trauma all worsened quickly. Stretchers lined the pavement. The injured were carried out first when possible. Many suffered lacerations from flying brick and glass. Others had broken limbs from falling masonry. Some were concussed and disoriented, unable to explain where they had been standing when the building gave way. Hospitals in South London began receiving casualties in waves. Doctors and nurses were used to wartime triage. They assessed quickly who could be stabilized, who required surgery, who would not survive. The numbers rose through the afternoon and into the evening. As bodies were recovered from the debris, the scale of the loss became clear. The confirmed death toll would reach 168. Many of the victims were children. It had been a Saturday. Families had been shopping together. The enclosed retail space, crowded just before midday, had concentrated the impact in one place. Those near the center of the collapse had little chance of survival. Identification took time. Personal items were recovered from pockets and handbags. Family members were called to assist in identifying the dead. Some waited through the night for news that did not improve. Outside the cordon, the neighborhood gathered in uneasy silence. New Cross was accustomed to hardship. It had endured rationing and earlier bombing, but this felt different. The destruction had been sudden and concentrated. Rescue operations continued into the night under artificial light. Heavy equipment was limited. Much of the clearing had to be done carefully and by hand to avoid further collapse. Fire crews monitored for gas leaks and secondary hazards. The crater in the road added instability to the debris field. By the following day, the worst of the search was complete. The shop that had been full of customers less than 24 hours earlier was gone. In its place stood a torn section of roadway and a flattened block of retail space. The arithmetic was final. 168 dead, more than 120 injured. A department store on a busy South London road had become one of the deadliest single V2 strikes in Britain. And still, many Londoners did not yet know exactly what had hit it. In the hours after the explosion, officials faced a familiar wartime question. What do you tell the public? The destruction on New Cross Road was obvious. A major building had collapsed. Casualties were high. Rescue crews worked in full view of the neighborhood, but the cause of the explosion was not immediately announced in full detail. Since September 1944, when the first V2 rocket struck London, the British government had managed information carefully. The weapon was new, its accuracy was limited, but it could be adjusted. If German planners learned where rockets were landing, they might refine their targeting calculations. For that reason, early reports of V2 impacts were often described in vague terms. Some were attributed to gas explosions or isolated incidents. Details were restricted. The goal was simple: deny the enemy feedback. By November, Londoners knew that something unusual was happening, but official confirmation was cautious. The New Cross strike followed the same pattern. Newspapers reported the devastation and the loss of life, but descriptions of the weapon were restrained. Wartime censorship did not erase the event. It shaped how it was discussed. Exact references to a supersonic ballistic missile launched from the Netherlands were not front-page explanations on the day of impact. Behind the scenes, authorities knew exactly what had occurred. The strike matched known V2 characteristics, the crater dimensions, the pattern of structural failure. Investigators were already tracking trajectories and impact points across London. The rocket campaign had been underway for nearly 3 months. But public morale mattered. London had endured years of bombing. Leaders did not want panic to return in full force. A weapon that could not be heard, seen, or intercepted challenged the sense of civilian control. Officials walked a narrow line. They could not deny the destruction. The death toll at New Cross was too large. Funerals would take place. Families would grieve. Entire blocks had been damaged. At the same time, they avoided dramatic language that might amplify fear. Privately, military analysts understood the limits of the weapon. The V2 was technologically advanced. It reached the edge of space. It traveled faster than sound, but it was not precise in a modern sense. It struck broad urban areas, not pinpoint military targets. It consumed significant German resources at a stage of the war when Germany was already retreating on multiple fronts. Strategically, it did not change the outcome of the war. Psychologically, it was different. The Blitz had filled the sky with aircraft. People could see the threat. They could run for shelters when sirens sounded. Even during the V1 campaign, the engine noise provided a grim warning. The explosion came first. The understanding came afterward. In New Cross, that difference was stark. Families had been shopping in daylight. There had been no blackout scramble, no rush to underground stations. The strike felt arbitrary because it was governed by ballistic mathematics, not visible air raids. As the days passed, the public gradually understood that Woolworths had been hit by a rocket, unlike earlier bombs. Official statements became more open as the war situation evolved and German launch capabilities narrowed. But the essential truth was already clear to those who lived through it. Not every V2 strike in London produced the same level of destruction. The rocket carried roughly 1 metric ton of high explosive. That was powerful, but not unprecedented in wartime bombing. What made the New Cross impact so deadly was not just the weapon. It was the combination of timing, structure, and environment. First, it was midday on a Saturday. Woolworths was crowded. Retail stores concentrate people into enclosed space. Customers stand close together. Staff work behind fixed counters. A strike at night might have damaged the building just as severely, but would have not found the same number of civilians inside. Second, the explosion occurred at or below ground level. When the V2 rocket struck, it penetrated before detonation. That created an upward surge of force beneath the foundation. Buildings are designed to carry weight downward through their supports. They are not built to withstand explosive force pushing upward from below. The result was rapid structural failure. Instead of walls simply being blown outward, the building lost its base. Floors dropped, columns buckled, roof sections fell inward. People inside were not just exposed to blast overpressure, they were caught in a crushing collapse. Third, it was an enclosed space. Blast waves behave differently indoors than in open air. In a street, pressure can dissipate outward. Inside a building, shock waves reflect off walls, ceilings, and floors. That reflection amplifies pressure locally and increases injury risk. Even individuals not directly beneath falling debris can suffer severe internal injuries from overpressure in confined areas. Brick fragmentation also contributed. When masonry falls under sudden force, it does not break cleanly. It shatters into heavy fragments. Those fragments become secondary projectiles inside the structure. Glass from the storefront and interior fixtures added to the hazard. In a packed retail space, there was little room to avoid flying debris. Fourth, the timing allowed no dispersal. The building was fully occupied at midday. With V-1 flying bombs, civilians sometimes had seconds to react. They could move away from windows. They could drop to the ground. Those seconds were not always enough, but they existed. At New Cross, the explosion came before any audible cue. No one had begun to move toward exits. No one had braced. Finally, location mattered. New Cross was densely built. Adjacent shops and terraced houses stood close to Woolworths. When the building collapsed and the crater formed, neighboring structures absorbed part of the blast. That increased injuries beyond the immediate footprint of the store. The pattern of destruction was intense but localized. A strike did not flatten an entire district. It devastated a concentrated section of New Cross Road. Within that concentration, casualty density was high. When analysts later reviewed V2 impacts across London, they saw variation. Rockets that struck open areas caused fewer fatalities. Impacts at night sometimes resulted in lower civilian losses. But a midday hit on a crowded commercial building represented a worst-case combination. The technology itself did not aim at Woolworths specifically in the modern sense. V2 guidance systems were not capable of precision targeting by individual storefront. The missile followed programmed coordinates. It struck within a general urban area. The tragedy at New Cross was shaped by probability and circumstance. A crowded shop, a structural design vulnerable to upward blast, a moment in the middle of an ordinary day. All of those factors converged at 12:26 p.m. on November 25, 1944. The result was 168 dead and more than 120 injured. The rocket was advancing engineering, but the scale of loss was human timing. The strike at New Cross was one moment in a broader campaign. The first V2 hit Britain on September 8, 1944. It struck Chiswick in West London. At the time, few people understood what had happened, just an explosion and a crater. From September 1944 through March 1945, Germany launched approximately 1,100 V2 rockets at Britain. Most were aimed at London. Others targeted cities such as Norwich and Antwerp, though Antwerp would suffer heavily in Belgium. In Britain alone, about 2,700 people were killed by V2 strikes. More than 6,000 were injured. The Woolworths disaster at New Cross remained the single deadliest individual V2 impact in the country. The rockets were launched from mobile platforms in the German-occupied Netherlands, particularly around The Hague. Launch crews could prepare, fire, and relocate quickly. Allied aircraft hunted these sites, but the system was difficult to disrupt completely. By the time reconnaissance identified one location, the launchers had often moved. Technically, the V2 was a milestone. It was the world's first operational long-range ballistic missile. It rose higher and traveled faster than any weapon previously used in combat. It combined liquid fuel propulsion, gyroscopic guidance, and supersonic descent. Strategically, however, it came too late. By late 1944, Germany was retreating on multiple fronts. Allied forces had landed in Normandy in June. They had pushed across France. Soviet armies were advancing from the east. The V2 consumed significant industrial resources, including forced labor in underground production facilities. It did not alter the outcome of the war. The weapon's accuracy was limited. It could strike a city, but not a specific building with modern precision. Its psychological effect outweighed its military value. For civilians, that psychological shift was profound. The Blitz had been terrifying, but visible. Aircraft crossed the sky in formation. Searchlights swept overhead. Sirens sounded. Anti-aircraft guns fired back. Even under bombardment, there was a sense of engagement. The V-1 had introduced automation. It was unmanned but audible. Londoners listened for the engine note and braced for the moment it cut out. The pattern repeated across the city. At New Cross, the pattern was clear. An ordinary street, a crowded store, a crater where a building had stood. As Allied armies advanced into those regions in early 1945, the launch areas were overrun. The campaign tapered off. The last V-2 strikes on Britain occurred in March 1945. In total, the rockets caused thousands of deaths. They damaged homes, shops, schools, and infrastructure, but they did not halt Allied progress. They did not force negotiations. They did not break London's will. The war in Europe ended in May 1945. In the years that followed, the V-2's technology did not disappear. Rocket science advanced rapidly. Engineers who had worked on the program were taken into American and Soviet projects. The same principles that carried explosives into London would later carry satellites into orbit. But in November 1944, that future was not visible from New Cross Road. What was visible was a crater in the street and a collapsed department store. The V-2 campaign marked a turning point in warfare. It showed that cities could be struck from high altitude without warning or interception. It foreshadowed the missile age that would define the second half of the 20th century. London had survived years of bombing. It had endured the Blitz. It had learned to read the sky. It had listened for engines, counted the seconds after sirens, and taken shelter when sound warned of danger. On November 25, 1944, that pattern ended. The V-2 that struck Woolworths in New Cross gave no warning. It fell from the upper atmosphere and detonated without advance notice. The building collapsed. The street was torn open. 168 people were killed in a place meant for ordinary life. The war would end 6 months later. The rockets would stop. London would rebuild again. But something had changed. For the first time, a city learned that destruction could arrive without sight, without sound, and without time to react. At New Cross, the future of warfare landed in silence. I'm Dave. I appreciate you watching. Please subscribe, like, comment, and share. And until next time, stand tall.
He's a Dave, dude. Dave's got to stick together, you know what I mean?